Greetings. Welcome back to the Cable Lead Revolution. This is Chachi with yet again another edition of Leaders with Leaders. This time through the magic of the interwebs, and thankfully Zoom is out there where people can have these video teleconferences. Joining me today is the Command Chief of 12th Air Force, Chief Master Sergeant John Storms. Chief Storms, thanks for being on the Cable Lead Revolution today.
Hey, Chachi, man, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, so thrilled you can make the time. And I know that people are in quarantine, but I know people are still super busy. So I appreciate not only you finding the time, but making the time to be on this. I know we had to cancel yesterday because the mission pops up, but huge thanks for your due diligence and making sure that we're able to put some good quality content to people who maybe do have some time and bandwidth and capacity to kind of ingest some leadership knowledge as they sit at home. But before we get into the talk, why don't you kind of introduce yourself and let the viewers and listeners know a little bit about who John Storms is.
Hey, sure. So thanks. I'm John Storms. I'm the Command Chief of 12th Air Force, Air Forces Southern, stationed at Davis-Monthan in Tucson, Arizona. Been in the Air Force coming up on 28 years. This is my third Command Chief assignment. I'm a career defender by trade, so I did that for about 24 years or so. Did one stint as an MSG superintendent at Lodges Field, and then have been in the Command Chief game for about the last 4 years.
Roger that. And speaking of Command Chief games, and obviously the COVID-19 pandemic is not universal to the Air Force or 12th Air Force or Air Forces Southern, but man, I can only imagine the trying times that it is out there trying to lead thousands of individuals as we go through this weird part in world history and how we get through it. So what are the challenges you are facing? What are you trying to do to help your organizations find success throughout this entire mess?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge, and I don't think this is unique to us, right? I think this is probably across the board, really across the world, is just finding a way to communicate effectively and make sure that everybody's aligned to the same message, the same policies, the same procedures. Obviously, as a leadership team, my boss is really focused on finding the right balance between protecting the force and maintaining our capability. And it's not super easy to do, but I think he's done a great job of it, obviously with the help of our higher headquarters. But I think the communication, it's an evolving pandemic, right? Things are changing by the second. There's a ton of information out there all over, not only the news networks, the internet, social media, and we're really focused on putting out the proper message to our airmen and to our kind of subordinate units, making sure that we're all aligned, we're all following the same guidance, and we're all kind of tracking, if you will, off the same set information. I think that's the most important piece.
Roger that. And for anybody out there who's watching or listening, I hope that you are finding something to do. And again, on behalf of both Chief Storms and myself, I hope that you're not suffering too much through this. Some people view this as an overreaction. Some people view it as an underreaction, and everything in between. But on behalf of he and I, we just wish you health and safety and security throughout this whole process, and hopefully not too much of a diminished financial kick in the junk, as it were, that this may be bringing to a whole lot of people. So putting that aside, and just going back to a very underwhelming everyday type of leadership conversation, as opposed to a worldwide pandemic. What are some of the biggest struggles or leadership challenges that you have had throughout your career that have really helped shape your leadership understanding and has helped shape who you are as a leader in one of these senior Air Force positions?
Yeah, so, Chachi, I tell you what, my wife, she's a retired senior NCO in the Air Force as well. And we laugh about this all the time, about just how truly blessed I've been and incredibly lucky I've been in my career to just be surrounded by absolutely amazing leaders, awesome examples of leaders, and just, good quality human beings. So, I haven't had a ton of struggles with leadership in my career. I have had a couple challenges, and I would say, the one that really sticks with me the most is just having dealt with what I would call an absent leader. They were there present, they were present physically, but they weren't there leading when the organization needed them the most. And that's kind of stuck with me. And that's something that I try to make sure that, I show up I bring what I bring to the team. I bring that when it's needed the most. You know, it's pretty easy to be a leader when everything's going great, right? And everything is firing the way it's supposed to. But when the people need it is when things aren't going very well. And that's what I really try to do. You know, there's probably varying degrees of opinion on how successful I've been at that. And I got that. But that's what I try to do. And, you know, again, incredibly lucky. Haven't had a whole lot of negative, circumstances with dealing with, you know, bosses and leaders. Just been incredibly blessed. But the ones that I've struggled with is when they really weren't there when we needed them the most, right? And it creates a ton of churn within the organization and a ton of stress. Now, I will say, on the flip side, it does present an opportunity for subordinate leaders to step up and kind of fill the void, which is incredible.
Nice.
Especially when you see that. But the undue stress and churn, right? That's what I'm really trying to avoid in my position. You know, am I there when it's truly necessary?
Now, with that, on the flip side of the coin is the good leaders that you have had. What about them? And but if you want to name drop, great, you know, by all means, if they're worthy of recognition. But what are some of the traits that you have seen phenomenal leaders displayed that you either like or try to embody or personify or just go forward, or maybe some stuff that they have done that has shaped your thought process and the way that you react to situations?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, we could sit here for the rest of the hour and I could just drop names of all these awesome people that I've been around, right? But I will tell you a few, right? So there's a brigadier general now out there named Jeff Valencia, who is an absolute superstar. Probably one of the most intelligent folks I've ever had the pleasure of being around. You know, enlisted leaders, Paul Wheeler is the epitome of a chief master sergeant that I measure every other chief master sergeant against. You know, he was my squadron superintendent when I was a master sergeant in one of the base defense squadrons at Moody. Had the chance to deploy with him a couple times over to Iraq. And he was just an incredibly knowledgeable person, but he was a great human being. He cared about the airmen. He cared about us. He took the time to develop us. You know, he kicked us in the butt when we needed it, but then after it was over, you know, he put his arm around us and explained, kind of show us some love too. And that's somebody that I obviously try to emulate. You know, one of my best pals in the whole wide world is Rick Parsons. You know, he retired as the ACC command chief probably 5 or 6 years ago. Just another incredible human being. And I had the pleasure to work with him when I was probably a staff tech and he was a tech master. And just his perspective on life. And, you know, I used to call him the mayor of Moody because, you know, I worked in an outer office and he was kind of in an office behind me. And there'd be 15 people lined up to go talk to Rick Parsons. And it was nothing about work. It was just about life. So I was really lucky to just kind of see that and absorb that every day. And, you know, those are some of the folks that have really, really rubbed off on me. And again, I just try to live up to the examples that they set for me at a pretty early age.
Roger that. And as you go back and look and understand, it's very funny how I look back and I evaluate my career and my leadership lessons and my journey through leadership or growing into leadership, as it were. What would you say, you know, what would you go back and tell young Airman John Storms? You know, what perspective sharing type of stuff, what tips or tricks would you tell him then that you only have the capacity to understand now, or you can only have learned it now? What would you want to share with him?
Yeah, so I think, well, first of all, there's a lot of things that young John Storms probably could have used, right? A lot of advice I could have taken. I will say probably the one that sticks out in my mind the most is understanding the difference between what is critical and what is important, and then what would be nice to do, right? And being able to prioritize those. You know, when you're a young leader and everything is basically valued the same way, everything is given the same priority, which is it has to happen right now and it has to be perfect, which is clearly not the case, right? There's things that have to happen. there's things we'd like to happen, and there's things that would be, well, that'd be cool if it could happen, right? But when everything is, hey, it has to happen right now and it has to be perfect, it just puts a ton of pressure and a ton of just not needed stress on your subordinates. And I probably struggled with that a lot as a young leader, a staff tech, probably especially a tech sergeant. I was a squad leader in the base defense squadron, right? So I had 13 folks, and everything was like, our hair is on fire. It has to happen right now. And, looking back on it, probably not the case, right? So understanding what's critical and what's important. There's a difference, right? And we react to those things differently. So I could have used that advice back then. And the one thing that I wish somebody had told me was talk less and listen more as a leader. Leaders at all levels solve problems, right? That's what we do, right? We're there to clear roadblocks for our subordinates. If you're constantly running your mouth, you don't understand what the problems are. You don't understand what the roadblocks are, right? So as a young leader, I felt maybe, that I had some awesome wisdom to share with folks, and they should probably be pretty lucky. They should feel lucky to hear me. Not the case, right? Maybe if I'd shut up a little bit and listen to some of the things that they had, some of their concerns, I guarantee I would have been a lot more effective.
So I think that's absolutely huge. I had screwed that up myself, and again, and a lot of it is just I hate to be sexist, but that's stuff that dudes do. And you hear it all the time that people speak to be understood. They don't listen to understand. That is primarily a male-dominated problem. I will righteously admit that. So I screw that up all the time. I didn't learn that until I went to Senior NCO Academy. Right. So I spent years screwing that up for everybody. I can even pinpoint the first conversation in my life where I truly opened my mind without prejudging the words that was coming out of his mouth. And the fact that I did that as a senior master sergeant is very embarrassing. And so that is super frustrating. And, I like your point of I use a lot of the Eisenhower box to determine things on urgent versus important, like to your whole point. But I think there's a good argument to be made for having, what's nice to do. Because there are a lot of things that if you put in that third dimension of nice to do, because there are good things. I'm going to start working on that graph, and perhaps you and I can kind of collaborate and see how that shapes out, because there is a conversation to be had there. So I'm very intrigued with that concept. So I appreciate you chiming in there. And it, kind of along these lines, outside of the talk less, listen more, a lot of the Air Force, we talk about the frozen middle.
That's right.
And we talk about our mid-level leaders who have been in long enough that they're not super motivated by patriotism and awesomeness, and they're starting to get disgruntled because they're not seeing the information flow down from the top as they wish they would. So they kind of feel frozen and stuck, and they're not high ranking enough to have a say, but they don't have all the opinion and all that different stuff. What advice would you have for them to kind of help them weave their way through this weird mid-level manager / leader type of environment?
Yeah. So, I mean, great topic, great discussion, just great thoughts there. Yeah, I think it's a tough spot, right? For those, what we call the frozen middle, right? They're technical experts, right? They're trying to do, whatever the widget making they're responsible for is, right? That's what they're focused on doing. And they're getting a ton of information pumped down to them, which might not make total sense, right? Because they just don't see everything in its entirety. My first bit of advice to them is just, have faith in your leadership, right? I realize some folks would probably argue with me on this point, right? But I think the Air Force does a pretty darn good job of selecting leaders and putting people in positions to be in charge, right? Our officer, commander selection process, again, some folks don't like it, but I think we do a pretty good job, right? I mean, it's hard to argue. It's hard to argue with the leaders that we have, the most senior leaders in the Air Force, right? Incredibly smart people, dedicated, great Americans, and they are making decisions, that quite frankly, the frozen middle, if you will, they don't see the complete picture, right? So I think they have, in order to execute effectively, they have to trust that the senior leaders are making the right decision given the information that they have. And then, just execute, right? Take the information you're given, pass it down to your subordinates, explain it, and then go execute it. I'm not really sure if I'm answering your question there, Chach, but
no, and again, I think that's absolutely fair. One of the things that I talk about is perspective, and you and I had a short conversation about this, and again, I when you're talking about having faith in leadership, I just say benefit of the doubt.
That's right.
Our first step, if we encounter frustration or we don't necessarily agree or we think this person is off their rocker, let's just take a step back and give somebody benefit of the doubt. And the way that I talk about benefit of the doubt is because, again, like we say it all the time, but I don't think we kind of contextualize it in a way that people can truly understand it and execute benefit of the doubt. So my conversation is if John Storms is my command chief and he does something that just absolutely pisses me off, or I don't understand, or I can't get behind it, and I'm absolutely rattled. My first step when it comes to benefit of the doubt is to ask myself, did John Storms purposefully do this to piss me off or make my life tough?
That's right.
If that answer is no, and more often than not, it absolutely is, then every other option is on the table, and it's viable and it's plausible. And so if I have the emotional intelligence to sit back and say, okay, he probably didn't do this to piss me off. Why do I think John Storms did this? Can I now shoot an email or have a phone call? Hey, chief, I'm kind of struggling with this, but perhaps I don't have the same perspective or the same information that you have. And I think just teaching people that concept inside that frozen middle can really help that out. Because no Air Force leader, and again, we absolutely do have bad ones, but percentage-wise, they are the extreme rarity as far as this goes. Like, our batting average is in the high 900s. Like
that's right.
As far as picking these leaders. And I haven't met one leader who purposefully sits there and twists their evil mustache.
That's right.
Figures out a way to make people's lives hell. Some people are just bad, or they don't get the human aspect or understanding that they are leading the human weapon system. But yeah, the passage of information, and I think the sharing of perspective is really what helps people out in those middle tiers.
That's right. And, I think it's important, right, for the leaders to be able to, when time permits, right, and the situation permits, to go ahead and share that perspective and help people understand the greater perspective, right? Sometimes, even today, not today, but just currently, sometimes my boss will make a decision, and at the moment, right, I'm not gonna be like, hey, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, boss. We shouldn't do that. But later, I'll be like, hey, sir, explain to me your thought process on this, right? And he's like, well, hey, I had a conversation with so and so and so and so and General so and so, and this is why. And I'm like, man, that makes perfect sense, boss. Thanks, right?
You bet.
So, I mean, it's even happening to me. But again, I don't automatically think like, man, the 2 stars off his rocker, he's lost his mind and he's doing this to ruin us, right? I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. And I understand what he's, why he did what he did after he explains it to me. So I think it's important now, if time permits, explain your rationale, explain your perspective to the subordinate level so they can understand as well.
So as I think kind of along these lines, as you went through your career and as you progressed through the ranks, what were some of the key successes or I would say key successes you had? What were some of the things that helped you find success? Whether it was a mindset, whether it was having faith in leader or benefit of the doubt or teamwork, what are some of the things that you would say are fairly responsible for your success in the United States Air Force?
Yeah, so I think great question. First of all, I think, and I mentioned it earlier, right? Just being incredibly blessed with just amazing supervision, amazing commanders, right? Amazing bosses. That for some reason, right? I don't know why, saw something in me and said, hey, maybe this dude's worth putting a little time into, and help shaping him and maybe kicking him in the butt to get him back on track when I needed it. So I'm incredibly thankful for that. and I just want to throw out here, right, that, my wife, retired Master Sergeant, one of the best senior NCOs I've ever seen. So she is still, my solicited and unsolicited feedback machine, right? On everything I do, every talk I give, every decision I make, right? I get feedback from her, right? So that helps me tremendously, and it's helped me. I met her when I was a A1C, and she's been like that my entire career, right? So that's helped tremendously. But the one thing, Chachi, that I really like to say here is I didn't go after the next job, the next position, the next whatever, because I thought it was something that was going to get me promoted. I went after things when it was time for me to move right onto the next thing. I went after something that I was interested in and I was passionate about. And I trusted in the system that if I did a good job with what they asked me to do, right, good things would happen. Whether that's being promoted, being recognized, whatever, right? I didn't worry about that stuff. I studied for promotion because, I realized that that's something I had to do, but I didn't worry about that other stuff. I went after the jobs that I was passionate about and I was interested in. And then I just poured my heart and soul into them, right? And good things happen. I'll tell you, right, this June will be 28 years, and I have never once dreaded coming to work. Not once. Right? I get excited every morning when I wake up. I come home from the gym, I get cleaned up, put my uniform on, and I'm happy to go to work and excited about it because I've always been able to do things that I'm excited about. So to me, that's success, right? When you can wake up every morning, be excited about what you're about to go do. So I think that's the key for me, right? And that's what I would tell people is find something you're interested in, something you're passionate about, and pursue it with everything you've got.
So why did you join the Air Force? And like this is again, I think it helps shape some perspective and understanding for why somebody would choose to serve. And for somebody who has enjoyed coming to work every single day for 28 years, what brought you in? And like, what about those days kept you in?
Yeah. So man, I'm not sure if I want to put this out for the whole world to see. I wasn't a great student. I didn't necessarily enjoy school. I enjoyed playing football, right, and baseball and wrestling, and I enjoyed hanging out with my buddies. I didn't necessarily enjoy doing term papers and, taking final exams. I tried a semester community college. It just wasn't for me, and I knew I needed to do something, right? I come from what I would consider a military family. Right, lots of folks in my family have served, in various lengths over their lives. And I said, hey, maybe this is something that I should go do, right? Something a little bit bigger than me, a lot bigger than me, with some really good people. And if nothing else, I'll do 4 years. I'll figure out what I really want to do with my life, and I'll move on. And then that first enlistment went by in a blink of an eye. And I was like, man, this is kind of cool, right? I kind of like what I'm doing. I felt at the time like I was pretty decent at it, what they were asking me to do. So I re-enlisted and then, met my wife, got promoted a couple times, really liked the assignment I had. And then I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm in for a while. I've already been here for 8 years. My wife's active as well. We've got a pretty decent life here. So, and just, more and more over time, man, I just, the people, just incredible people across our force. And that, and it's just who I am now. Right. I think it's, I was John Storms, from New Jersey, who joined the Air Force. But now I'm Airman John Storms. Right. And it's kind of taken over who I am. And I'm pretty thankful for it.
I had kind of a similar journey. And one of the things I have a podcast about is the My Hour. And when I joined the Air Force. And right about Staff Sergeant, like I really started kind of buying in and understand that this was my Air Force. And then I had a part to play in shaping my Air Force. And then somewhere like right around Senior in Chief, it became our Air Force.
That's right.
It started. So it's very interesting for me. And, we talk about different levels of buy-in. or as far as I guess scientifically we'd call it organizational commitment. But
Right.
I think organizational commitment can be identified by those three words. And so
Yeah.
I went through a very similar journey, so I can absolutely understand that. And before we go into our first break, let's kind of go back to the very beginning, talking about COVID-19. There are a lot of families and probably some airmen and some people struggling out there who are having to stay home and they're missing out on wages, or maybe they got displaced. So this is currently affecting you. If you would mind sharing some of that with our leaders, because this is, I think, unique for them that this just doesn't hit some of the lower ranks or some of the junior people. But go ahead, John.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, gosh, I guess back in probably 2006, my wife and I were stationed at Langley. We bought a house. We still owned a house. My wife went there while I was scheduled to be traveling all over, Central and South America. Took some time while I wasn't going to be here to go back and do some renovations on the house, and hopefully get another tenant in it. And sure enough, coronavirus spreads, becomes a global pandemic. And now my wife has been, basically stuck at our house in Virginia for about the last 2 months. So, it is what it is. It's rough. It's kind of sucks not having her here for sure. I know it sucks for her not being here. I think the thing that kind of gets us through is we do a great job of communicating. Even when I'm traveling and she's here in Arizona, I FaceTime her at least a couple times a day and just communicate with her. And I think that's been kind of our secret, is to always communicate. So, we're doing that as often as we can. Obviously, in the office I work in, there's no cell phones inside the offices. So, it makes it a little difficult all the time to talk to her. But in between meetings and in between engagements, I'll run out and grab my phone and see if I can give her a call real quick and just let her know I'm thinking about her, and kind of talk her through, what I know and what our plan is to, eventually get her back here, back home safe. So it's been a bit of a struggle, but we're getting through it.
You bet. Well, I wish you nothing but the best. And with that, we'll go into our first break. So stay tuned, and we will be right back with the Command Chief for 12th Air Force, Chief Master Sergeant John Storms. Be right back, everybody. Welcome back from break with this edition of Leaders with Leaders with, again, Chief Master Sergeant John Storms from 12th Air Force. And speaking of 12th Air Force, working for U.S. Southern Command is probably one of our lesser recognized combatant commands. So I can only imagine the weird diversity of thought and mission and everything that goes with a South America type of regional orientation. Can you tell us a little bit about this and all that you have to work through to help find success?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joshi. So, at 12th Air Force's Southern, we are one of 5 components that support U.S. Southern Command, which is, down in Doral, Florida. Obviously, there's Army South, there's Marine Forces South, there's Navy South, and then there's Special Operations South. And then there's some joint task force that are also tied in there. So, we're obviously the air component to Southern Command, and we're working by, with, and through 31 partner nations in Central and South America and the Caribbean. It's our shared neighborhood, right? We share values and the rule of law and all those things, and we're really just trying to create a team of nations, right, to protect our hemisphere. In the air side, we're helping them improve their air forces, and that can look a lot of different ways. Whether it's through foreign military sales or excess defense articles, a lot of subject matter expert exchanges, a lot of training. My role as the command chief of AF South, I spend a lot of time helping them develop and professionalize their enlisted force. It's pretty interesting. I think of the 31 nations that kind of make up our AOR, I think we've got pretty decent relationship with about 26, sometimes 27, depending on the day. The professionalism and the leadership abilities, the responsibilities of the enlisted force vary pretty greatly across the AOR. They all want to be like us, like the United States, whether that's the Army, the Air Force, Marines, or the Navy, or the Coast Guard for that matter. Um, and they're all at various stages of getting there. The thing that I found is, it's a culture thing, in Latin America. Their enlisted forces are really, skilled labor. The officers make the decisions. The officers have all the responsibility. And I think they see the benefit of having a very professional and enabled and empowered enlisted force. And one of the things I spend a lot of my time doing is helping them get there. So it's a really interesting job. That takes up, that's really half of what we do in 12th Air Force. The other half, I'm a regular numbered Air Force. So we've got, five wings that fall under us, right? So I'm kind of helping their command chiefs, just like any other NAF command chief would do. And I would say that General Croft and I are incredibly lucky and blessed that our wing command teams at our 5 installations are absolutely amazing, and they do a great job. So really, we're just there to kind of advocate and maybe give them a little guidance here and there when they need it. But for the most part, man, they're just crushing it every single day, and not only taking care of their airmen, but also taking care of the mission. So it's an awesome job to have. I do wish I spoke Spanish. I'd probably be a little bit more effective if I was fluent in Spanish, but other than that, it's pretty awesome.
Man, I can only imagine the challenges involved with that, especially with some of the contemporary focus of military operations is more distinctly not in South America, but man, for an average everyday American, you wouldn't realize everything that is happening there. But I absolutely know what a diverse mission set that is. So I huge thanks to you and your team for doing what you do to keep things in order and build those relationships. And like you said, doing the by, with, and through type of operations. But it's funny you brought up General Croft, and we all served together, deployed during the same year together from 17 to 18. So please tell him I said hi and wish.
I sure will.
But again, talking about some of the officer development. When I was talking to Colonel Scott Campbell, Soup Campbell, yesterday, he was talking about how he engages the cadets at the Air Force Academy and what they can expect and how they should interact with the enlisted corps and all the lessons that they can learn and all the benefits to be made from developing that enlisted corps and forming professional relationships with them. What has been your role and your understanding as an enlisted man to help out the officer development? And does that change a little bit as you've gotten into the ranks of the command chiefs?
Yeah, absolutely. As a junior enlisted guy, right, I was doing my thing, right, supervising my airmen. When asked, right, helping to develop maybe some lieutenants, and depending, as I kind of transitioned into that master sergeant world. Helping to develop maybe some CGOs, right? Really technical, duty job specific, AFSC specific stuff, right? And as I, made senior and chief, that's kind of expanding to, enlisted development, right? Our EPRs, our decorations, right? A lot of our officer corps, they grew up in an officer-centric world, right? A lot of our flyers, they don't have a ton of experience in dealing with the careers of enlisted folks, right? As our evaluation system has transitioned, what the EPRs need to look like, right? These are the things that I'm constantly talking to our commanders about, talking to the directors within our headquarters, and quite frankly, talking to my own boss about, on a pretty consistent basis. And then, as a command chief, man, I feel like, I get the opportunity to kind of weigh in on, a broad range of topics. And it's pretty awesome. There's some things that I get to teach, my boss, who's a 2-star general. I get to teach the vice, who's a 1-star. Let's not confuse that. They teach me a ton more than I teach them, right? I just want to be clear there. But, especially when we're talking about the development of enlisted force and kind of the execution of our evaluation system and promotion system, right? I think that's really where I weigh in the most, as we talk through maybe some things like discipline and, hey, if we, through the non-judicial punishment, if we're going to take this action, what does that really mean? right? These are things that they don't necessarily understand the nuances and the details of. So it's kind of my job there. And then, throughout our organization, just, influencing and helping develop, and maybe, like we talked about earlier, increasing the perspective of some of our CGOs and maybe FGOs, right? I think a lot of them are a lot more comfortable coming and talking to the chief than they are going and talking to the 2-star. So, hey, chief, what's the boss thinking about when this was decided, right? Maybe they're more comfortable asking me that. So I have an opportunity to kind of explain the boss's perspective and maybe help open up their apertures a little bit to what they would normally get. So again, super blessed to be in a position. And the one thing I'd like to say, Chachi, right? And I think this applies to anybody who's in a leadership position. And this is something that's going to sound very familiar to a lot of people within the Air Force, right? And I kind of steal it from the weapons school, right? Being humble, being credible, and being approachable. As a command chief, I've got to make sure that what I say is credible, right? And I'm giving sound advice and sound guidance to whatever officer I'm talking with, especially my boss. We can't afford to lose our credibility, because once we lose our credibility, we're done in the position, right? And sometimes that means being quiet, right? Sometimes that means, speaking up and maybe persisting a little bit. Hey, chief, yeah, I got it. Thanks. No, sir, I don't think you got it. This is what I'm really trying to say. No, chief, I got it. No, sir, I don't think you do. Right. Sometimes you have to have those conversations, but really being sure that you're giving them sound guidance and you're thinking through things, so you're not just talking to hear your own voice. I think it's really important.
Yeah, fair. And one of the things that you talked about, one of the things that I learned in Kuwait from our vice, Colonel Andy Parath, who's now the wing commander at 11th Air Force, or not 11th Air Force, 11th Wing at a Joint Base Andrews, is, like when he was talking to the leaders out there, and he goes, before you come to the wing commander, he's like, bring it to the chief, bring it to me. He goes, we're your 2 gimmies. Like right. You get 2 free conversations with us, because we've got our finger on the pulse of what's going on, where the boss's mindset is, and maybe we can help you shape that conversation. Maybe you come up and maybe you don't have it all put together quite right, and you don't want to step on anything. When you go in there and have that conversation, we can help you prepare. So man, I hadn't thought about that in quite a while, but having the chief or another trusted agent to be that gimme. Right.
That's right.
Man, like what an amazing concept to utilize your expertise, and then your ear that you have of the commander. You can have those conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. So with that, I think a lot of people, throughout their careers get a little bit of, what I call scar tissue from just interactions with different people. There are things that I have that either I distinctly do or distinctly don't do based off of some scar tissue that I have from previous leaders. There can be good scar tissue and bad scar tissue. Like if you have a heart replacement, you may love that scar that happens in the middle of your chest that's keeping you going. Or you may have some very, very bad scar tissue. So is there any scar tissue that you've accumulated throughout your career, good or bad, that has helped shape your understanding of leadership in any way?
Yeah, so of course, right? And we spoke earlier, about how blessed I've been, and of course, it's not always been cupcakes and rainbows. I've had some challenges, right? And the first thing I'd like to say is, in my opinion, there's no such thing as a perfect leader, right? Even as blessed as I've been, everybody's got faults. Everybody makes mistakes, right? So one of the things I've learned is, even people with the best of intentions are going to make mistakes, right? So understand that you're going to make mistakes, but if they're being made with good intentions, right? Own a mistake, learn from it, and then move on, right? Don't dwell on it, right? Don't let it get you down. Don't let it ruin your confidence, right? Don't get gun shy over making a mistake, right? So, again, I think, pretty common discussion point we have in Air Force is, hey, there's good supervisors, there's bad supervisors. You're going to learn from both, right? I mean, I agree with that 1,000%, right? There's things that you see somebody do and you're like, note to self, don't ever do that. And then there's things you're like, oh my gosh, like that's the greatest thing I've ever seen. I really want to emulate that when I get the chance. So I think that's important, right? And kind of going back to making mistakes, and there's no such thing as a perfect leader. I think it's important to as you're developing yourself as a leader, right, to do it around a values-based approach, right? Again, something I've learned over time, maybe through some trial and error. For us, it's pretty easy, right? The Air Force gives us a set of core values that's pretty universally understood across our force. And if me as a leader, right, regardless of the level I'm at, if I try to filter every decision and every action I take if I filter it through my core values and make sure that everything I'm doing is in alignment with those, I'm not going to go wrong, right? It might not be perfect, right? But I'm doing it from a good place and with good intentions. And if there are mistakes made, I can learn from it and then move on, right? Use it as an opportunity to grow. I'm not trying to kill somebody, and I'm not trying to ruin somebody's life, right? But if I make a mistake and maybe I hurt somebody's feelings, or maybe I slow them down a little bit, maybe slow their momentum down in their career, I can have an honest discussion about why I did what I did, and then I can kind of explain my rationale, learn from it, and move on. And then going back to what we talked about earlier, just the scar tissue, the things that kind of stuck with me. I had a string of a couple bosses that were just absent, right? And man, I learned so much from those couple years there. I think K. Wright, right? Attitude reflects leadership, right? That's his quote, and I think it's fantastic. When you have a commander, your leader is not there, right? I mean, attitude reflects leadership. The whole organization suffers from that. So I just think it's super important when you're in a leadership position, you've got to show up every single day, right? And not just when it's easy and fun and cool, right? Not just when things are going well. It's most important to show up when things are not going well.
Fair. And I love that quote. The first time I'd heard that quote, attitude reflects leadership, was the movie Remember the Titans.
That's right.
To where Julius Campbell and Gary Bertier were having the conversation. And we even talked about it when I was at NCO Academy, because I was so blown away by this conversation. And that's, I love watching movies. I was having this conversation with Brian Kraselnik there at 5th Air Force. And again, with Sue Campbell, is, anything can be an exercise in leadership if you have the presence of mind to do so. If you can look at anything through a leadership lens. I've got a podcast coming up about horticulture and agriculture and aquaponics and hydroponics, because to me, that's a lesson in leadership for helping something grow and creating the right environment for something to grow. But again, I love that conversation. And if you haven't seen the movie, these two all-star defensive backs are playing their like defensive end and linebacker combo, and they're yelling at each other and they have forced interaction. And this is about some segregation stuff that's still happening in the 70s. So Gary, the team captain, goes up to Julius and he's like, "Hey man, you're leaving me out to dry every single time." Julius says, "Hey, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get mine," and so he's being really, really selfish. And Gary comes back and he says, "That's the worst attitude that I've ever heard." And I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely. That's a horrible attitude." And then Julius, to your point, was like, "Yeah, attitude reflects leadership, Captain." Like, mind blowing. Like, what a phenomenal concept. And in that moment, I had such I felt like I was there, experiencing both sides of the conversation. So I loved every part of that. Forgive me, drop my notebook. But again, so speaking of quotes, as far as that goes, sorry, that was a little bit of a diatribe. But again, I love that point, and I truly believe that, like you, attitude does reflect leadership. But are there any quotes that really speak to you, that you've heard along the way, read along the way, seen along the way, that helps John Storms understand leadership and move forward as you help others find success and as you help them grow and evolve as leaders?
Yeah. So if you'll bear with me, Chachi, I've got 4, right? That as I was kind of thinking through this, not necessarily ones that I've read. These are ones that I've picked up from conversations with people that I respect, not only as people, but as incredible leaders, right? So some of them I'm going to have to paraphrase, in hopes of keeping us a family-friendly podcast. but I'll do my best here. So this one came from, and I know you and I have talked about this several times, right? But this one, and it's my favorite one. It is my go-to. It came from a now retired 2-star general I worked for a few years ago, right, in a deployed environment, and we had a rare moment of calm in his world, right? He was a pretty busy dude at the time, in the fight against ISIS. But we're just kind of talking about leadership and how you get to where you're at. How do you get to be a 2-star general, right? As a deputy commander of the CJTF, right, against ISIS. And he was like, work hard and be a good person, right? And, again, I paraphrased. But, it's really simple, right? But to me, it says so much,
You bet.
right? Again, kind of like I talked about with leading with values-based, right? That goes back to just being a good person, right? Doing things with the right intentions. And then work hard, right? Know what your job is. Do it to the very best of your ability every single day, right? I mean, we're all fighting for, extra resources and the funding and the manpower and all that stuff that we need, right? But do the very best you can with what you have, right? And just be a good person about it. That speaks to me volumes. And I, like you, when you were watching Remember the Titans, right? And they had the conversation, man, I just sat back like, my eyes like big like saucers and my mouth wide open. He probably thought there was something wrong with me, right? But I was just blown away by that quote. And I think it's awesome.
You bet.
So that's my favorite one. A close second, and this came from a deputy group commander that I worked with back probably 2014-ish. He said, "Chief, in the absence of leadership, lead." Right? So again, kind of going back to some of the scar tissue I have about absent leadership, in the absence of leadership. And I said earlier, right, that a lot of subordinate leaders really stepped up and filled that void. Again, I think it's a great advice to somebody. A lot of people are very hesitant to jump up and take a leadership position or a leadership role. And sometimes when the leader's not doing it, man, you've got to do it, right? And I like that one a lot. The third one, I don't know where this came from. I might have made it up myself. I don't know. I don't want to give myself credit for it, but I'm not sure where it came from. But lead with passion, not emotion.
Nice.
When you see an emotional person trying to make a point, right, or have a discussion where there's an opposing point of view, and one person is factual and the other person is emotional, the factual person wins every single time, right? You're not going to be effective if you get emotional about a subject. But being passionate is required, right? You've got to love what you do, and you've got to be all in. And you can't be a robot. You've got to care about some of this stuff, right? But you can't get to the point where it's controlling your mind and your ability to think rationally and act rationally, right? So to me, that's a good one. I really like that. And then the last one, and we can talk about all of the implications of this, right? But is bloom where you're planted. For me, it's do the best job you can with whatever you're asked to do. If you're thinking about, again, what's next, what's better for you, what's going to get you promoted, what's going to get you recognized, not only is the mission that you're tasked to accomplish at the time going to suffer, but in my mind, more importantly, your subordinates are going to suffer, right? Because you're focused on something that's not even in front of you. And it's great to have a plan, right? And to care about where you want to go and the goals you want to achieve, right? But you've got to focus on what's the here and now and what's in front of you, and take care of the people that are helping you get that done, right? So again, now I agree with you, right? We kind of talked offline here a little bit that, growing and blooming requires a lot of things, right? It requires some nurturing and some care, and somebody's got to be helping you do that so you can bloom. Agree with all that. Don't dispute any of it. But for me, it speaks to really focusing on where you are right now and doing the best job you can there. So those are some of the quotes that I like. Kind of, every once in a while, I'll throw them at somebody. You know, I throw them at my wife all the time, and she kind of rolls her eyes at me. Um, but you know, sometimes when I talk to some of the younger airmen, these are some of the things I'll talk to them about and kind of what they mean to me. You know,
So I love that. And again, the whole, I do like the ownership part of bloom where you're planted. Like you regardless of the environment, you have to be successful. You need to make
sure,
yourself successful. And there's always reasons to blame the environmentals or the people, or maybe you don't have the best team, but maybe they placed you there to fix that. Maybe this is your
that's right.
opportunity to shine and do everything else. And again, you can look at so many different, like, losers see the difficulty and opportunity, but winners see opportunity and difficulty, right?
That's
So
right.
I learned that from then Colonel, now I think 3-star General Gary Valesky of the United States Army was the first person that I heard say that. But absolutely love that quote. And again, I really like the point of, lead with passion, not emotion. And I really like your understanding that, hey, I want you passionate.
That's
I
right.
want passionate people working for me. And yes, sometimes an unnecessary byproduct, or sorry, a necessary byproduct and realistic byproduct of passion is emotion. Absolutely got it. But at the same time, as a professional, if you want to be successful, you really need to exercise things in the right way. And maybe
Sure.
you take a step back, you react privately, you reflect, and then maybe you can respond, right?
That's
Rather
right.
than having that response. So man, I love absolutely every single one of those quotes. And again, going back to the part of don't focus on the next. I think, man, I see so many people who get caught up in their career, or maybe this wasn't a good career assignment for me. I've had those thoughts like, oh, this career sucks, or this is a death sentence, or hey, I already
That's
did
right.
that. I need something new. But
Right.
it seemed to work out for me. And if you shake the bucket,
That's right.
cream rises to the top, and just make the most out of every situation. So phenomenal insight. I really do like that. And then kind of going along with quotes, are there any books or training that you've had, or TED Talks, or different classes that you've gone to that you would recommend to anybody out there who just trying to find their way to weave through the complexity of leadership?
Sure. Yeah. So here's one. Here's a book that I don't know how well known it is, and this was a Christmas gift this past holiday season from my wife to me, and I don't know if she's trying to tell me something, right, without just coming out and saying it, right. But this one is called Einstein's Boss: 10 Rules for Leading Genius. Okay, and the guy that's Einstein's boss is not a genius, right, and he's leading a team of geniuses. Now, maybe my wife's trying to tell me that I'm not a genius. Um, she's probably right. So, but there's some really great points in this, right? That you don't have to be the smartest person in a room or the smartest person on a team to make the team effective and to make them successful and to make them achieve results that are greater than the sum of the parts. So there's some really good points in there. Again, it's 10 rules. Again, I and Chacha, we've known each other for a few years, right? And I know I'm not the smartest dude in any room I walk in, right? But I'm pretty sure that I can be an effective leader, right? Even with some folks that are smarter than me. And this just kind of lays out kind of a roadmap to do that. Pretty good book. So I recommend that one. Written by Robert Hromas is the name. Hromas.
Got it.
Yeah, and so here's another author that I really like reading, and it's not as clear like, hey, here's 10 rules for being better at what you're trying to get better at. But a guy named Stephen Pressfield, you might have heard of him. He writes kind of like these historical fictions. Probably his most popular book is Gates of Fire, right? Again, historical fiction of the Battle of Thermopylae, right? Made famous by the movie 300. So it's a historical fiction that takes you through from the eyes of a servant of one of the Spartan warriors, right? And brings you through this guy's whole life from the time that he was a young 5 or 6 years old up and through up until the battle, right, at Thermopylae. So he's probably in his mid-20s. Um, and just the leadership lessons in there about the Spartan leadership and how they saw things and how they executed. King Leonidas. I mean, just the epitome of servant leadership, right? And to see um, how that plays out is pretty remarkable, right? And I think there's a lot of lessons you can learn in there if you're looking for them, or if you just want a really cool story, right? It's a great story, but there's plenty of lessons in there. And he also writes one that I really like called "The Virtues of War," and that's really following kind of documenting the life of Alexander the Great, and his conquest. Just lessons left and right in there if you're looking for them. So those are some of the things that I've read. And, again, I feel like I've been surrounded by just incredible leaders my entire life. And just, I'm a sponge, right? I just sit there and I try to learn from everybody I'm around, right? Regardless of the position they're in. Some of the best leaders I've ever seen have been senior airmen, right? And there's some lessons to be learned from those guys too, right? So don't think it's got to be a general officer or a chief master sergeant.
You bet.
I try to learn from everybody I'm around. So that's really kind of how I learn what I learn.
Absolutely. Wow, phenomenal. Thank you. Sorry, I'm really interested in the Einstein's boss, and I'm sorry, this is going to sound obnoxious as I say it, but I've had leaders that have distinct roles that had distinct roles in grooming and developing me that never achieved the ranks that I did. But I'm
Absolutely.
so very thankful for these bosses that took the time to grow and develop me. And I realized I just called myself a genius through this analogy. That wasn't what I was going for. But man, I'm very intrigued. So that's probably going to be the very next book that I download and listen to. And as we wrap up the podcast here, one of the things that I absolutely ask everybody that's been on the podcast is what do you do for oxygen? What do you do to take care of you, to make sure that on a daily basis that you are doing what you can to present the best Chief Master Sergeant John Storms to the United States Air Force and 12th Air Force and all the teams that you help lead?
Yeah, great question, right? And this is kind of something we talk about pretty often. So first, I will tell you that now that I'm able to understand the difference between critical and important, right? Like we talked about earlier. If there's things that are important but not critical, and it can wait till tomorrow, it's going to wait till tomorrow, right? My days of staying in the office for 16 to 20 hours a day have come and gone, right? I've learned some pretty hard lessons along those lines. So I get out of the office at a decent hour. So what I really like to do is I like to come hang out with my wife, right? Our careers have taken us in different directions a lot. So when we get some time to hang out, we like to hang out. So we do that. So that helps obviously a lot, right? And again, I mentioned earlier that she's a source of feedback at all times, again, solicited and unsolicited. So that's always good for me too, right? To just talk through things. And then I just like to work out. I'm not the most physically fit specimen you've ever come across, right? But it allows me to just clear my head, right? Hang out with some buddies, get a good workout in, do some stuff that probably somebody my age shouldn't be able to do. Sweat, and then that's how I start my day. I get up pretty early in the morning, head to the gym. Got a small little group of folks that we work out together. And it's cool seeing everybody in the morning. We get our workout on, and that helps me get through my day. It's a lot of times it's the best hour of my day, right? Because it's selfishly I'm focused on me, right? And I'm doing something that I really enjoy. And then it's pretty funny that the days I can't get to the gym before work, like it's noticeable how my day goes, right? It's vastly different from the days that I actually get to go to the gym. So that's what I really like to do. And, I just love being outdoors too. So as you know, as a fellow resident of Arizona, there's amazing places to go here. We've got some pretty incredible mountains, not too far from here. So on the weekends, I'll get out and just go park in some parking lot somewhere and start climbing. Sometimes I should probably have somebody with me, so at least they know where to tell the cops to look for the body when I fall off one of these hills. But it's a great place, so I just get outside and enjoy nature. That's really what I do. Kind of helps me recenter and refocus.
Roger that. So again, that's for any of you who are listening out there, here's a guy. You have to figure out of roughly 290,000 enlisted men and women, if not more, inside the United States Air Force. Here's somebody who's easily in one of the top 50, like 50 positions, still making sure that he's making time for himself, that he does what he needs to make sure that he's filling his cup, because every single day as he fills other people's cups, it gets less and less, and you can't fill anybody else's cup from an empty cup. So I appreciate all the effort that you do to take care of you, to take care of your own personal weapon system, as we tend to speak in those terms. And just kind of wrapping up the podcast today, you don't have to look very far to hear everything that goes along with CAPE, with a caring, alignment, perspective, and expectations. You have to care about being a better leader. You have to care about being truly present and not absent. You may be there in body, but not in mind and spirit and everything. So you have to care. We talked about aligning values and values-based leadership. We talk about sharing perspective and listening to that frozen middle and making sure that we're getting info to them and giving them an avenue to communicate with us. And then we talked about some of your expectations for what you want of leader, for again, just kind of being present, how we can develop each other, how we can help teach each other, and the roles and responsibilities throughout all of that. So Chief Storms, man, I really appreciate you taking time on a Saturday to be on the podcast and make this happen. I'd like to kind of offer up some closing comments from you, my friend.
Yeah. So first of all, Chach, I just want to thank you for having me on. It's pretty cool to get to talk to an old buddy about some stuff that we're both pretty passionate about, but not emotional about. And it's cool. I really enjoyed our time when we were deployed together, and the opportunity we had to just kind of talk through some stuff like this. Now to do it on a podcast is pretty neat, and it's always great to talk to you. I think if I could leave just one more point, right? Leaders, in my mind, leaders exist to ensure their subordinates succeed. And I think if you use your CAPE acronym, right? If you hit all 4 of those points, you're probably going to do that, right? So I think it's pretty important. And I thank you for what you're doing. I thank you for the vigor in which you go after this. It's pretty awesome. And again, thanks for having me on, and I wish you nothing but the best in your endeavors.
You bet. I appreciate that, my friend. To everybody out there watching or listening, if you were able to take at least one thing away from anything that Chief Storms has shared with us today, then this hour was worth your time. Then this effort was worth your time. If you do one thing better each day, imagine how amazing you're going to be at the end of the year. So with that, Chief Storms, I appreciate you being on the Cape Lead Revolution. Thank you for everybody for tuning in today. We'll catch you next time. And this is Chacha reminding you to always educate, anticipate, and dominate. We'll talk to you later. See ya.